They didn't have clocks, phones, or even written language. So what did cavemen actually spend their time doing? Were they constantly hunting and fighting to survive? Or was their day-to-day life more routine than we imagine? Did they sit around fires telling stories or spend hours making these tools and tracking animals? The truth might surprise you. Because while the world they lived in was brutal, their lives were far more complex and even relatable than most people think. In this video, we will dig into the real daily lives of our ancient ancestors and uncover what a normal day looked like tens of thousands of years ago. When you hear the word cavemen, what pops into your mind? People grunting at each other? Banging rocks together in a smoky cave? Maybe someone chasing a mammoth with a stick? Yeah, we've all seen those cartoons and comedy sketches. But what if I told you that image is way off? Cavemen, more accurately, prehistoric humans, were not mindless, primitive beings who just sat around all day doing nothing. They were some of the most resourceful, adaptable, and creative people to ever walk the earth. These were the first humans to solve real survival problems without Google, electricity, or even permanent homes. So who exactly are we talking about when we say cavemen? The term usually refers to early Homo sapiens and their close relatives like Neanderthals, who lived during the Paleolithic era, a period that stretched from about 2.5 million years ago to around 10,000 years ago. Not all of them lived in caves, by the way, but many found temporary shelter there, and that's how the nickname stuck. There were no alarms, no blaring phone notifications, and definitely no 5 more minutes snooze buttons. For cavemen, the day began with the light of dawn gently spilling into the cave and the soft sounds of nature, chirping birds, rustling leaves, maybe the distant splash of a nearby stream. They didn't jolt out of bed like we do on a Monday morning. Instead, they stretched slowly, waking up on beds of animal hides or maybe just the cool cave floor. The rhythm of the sun was their clock, and their bodies were tuned to it perfectly. First things first, a quick check of their space. They'd clear out last night's ashes, brush away animal droppings, and toss out any leftover waste. Cleanliness might not sound like a big deal in the Stone Age, but keeping the hearth tidy and the cave free of pests helped prevent disease and kept the group safer. Even grooming was part of the morning routine. Matted hair was untangled with fingers or bone combs, and if someone had lice, which was pretty common, grooming became a team activity. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was bonding. And of course, there was the fire. If the flames had died down during the night, someone would crouch next to the pit and gently coax the embers back to life using dry moss or preserved kindling. If the fire had gone out completely, reigniting it became urgent. It was the heart of their home, offering warmth, light, and protection from hungry nighttime predators. Breakfast wasn't a grand feast, it was practical. Dried berries, some nuts, maybe a scrap of smoked meat from the night before. These were shared communally, fueling everyone up for the day's work ahead. Once hunger was eased and the fire was stable, it was time to plan. There wasn't much in the way of language as we know it, no long speeches or detailed agendas. Instead, they communicated through gestures, facial expressions, and simple sounds. Who would go hunting? Who'd head out to gather food? Who would stay back and tend to the camp? Everyone had a role, and while it wasn't rigid or formal, it was understood. Elders and the injured usually stayed behind, taking care of the children, tending the fire, or working on tools and clothing. By the time the sun was fully up, the camp was already in motion. No time wasted, no one left idle, because survival didn't wait. It was something they became. It demanded full focus, sharp tools, sharper instincts, and a whole lot of courage. You didn't just walk into the woods and throw a spear at the first animal you saw. A hunt was a calculated mission, and survival depended on getting it right. Before heading out, hunters prepared their bodies and minds. They sometimes painted their skin with natural pigments like charcoal, red ochre, and even crushed berries. It helped them blend into their surroundings, but it may also have had a ritual meaning, like a mental switch that said, "Now we hunt." Their weapons, stone-tipped spears, slings, knives, were checked and tested. A weak spear could mean a missed opportunity or worse, a deadly mistake. Then came the tracking. Unlike us, who might struggle to spot a cat in our own backyard, these early humans were expert detectives. A bent twig, a hoof print, Even a pile of fresh dung told a whole story. What animal passed by, how big it was, how fast it moved, and how long ago it was there. They read the forest like a book, and the more experienced hunters passed that knowledge down, gesture by gesture. When they finally spotted prey, the moment had to be perfect. Some groups used ambush tactics, hiding in bushes until the animal got close. Others practiced persistence hunting, chasing animals for miles until they collapsed from exhaustion. Either way, the final moment was intense. Spears flew through the air, sometimes launched with atlatls, a kind of ancient spear thrower that gave extra power and distance. Then came the close-range work, where one wrong move could mean a broken bone or a goring. If the hunt was successful, the tension exploded into relief. Shouts of triumph rang out, not from pride, but from sheer gratitude. Then came the messy part, butchering. The meat was cut into strips. Bones were cracked open to scoop out the rich, fatty marrow. Organs were sorted, some eaten raw for a quick boost, others wrapped for later. Hides were carefully removed for clothing and shelter. If the animal was too large to carry whole, they processed it on the spot. The return to camp was a celebration. The smell of meat often reached the cave before the hunters did. And when they arrived, the group didn't gather like spectators, they shared. Food wasn't kept by the one who killed it. It was given freely because one person's success meant everyone ate. Later that evening, around the fire, they'd tell the story. Not in words as we know them, but in movements, sounds, and eyes wide with adrenaline. But what happened when the hunt didn't go as planned? Or when meat wasn't enough? That's when the real stars of survival stepped in, the gatherers. While the hunters were out chasing wild animals through forests and plains, the rest of the group wasn't just sitting around. They were out doing something just as important, gathering food. And believe it or not, this was actually where most of the calories came from. That's right, foraging made up 60 to 80% of the daily diet in many prehistoric communities. Hunting got the glory, but gathering kept everyone alive. So, who were the gatherers? Mostly women, children, and elders. But these roles weren't set in stone. If someone had sharp eyes and knew their plants, they were useful, no matter their age or gender. Survival didn't care about titles, it cared about skills. And those skills, they were serious. Foragers weren't just wandering around, plucking random berries. They had a deep knowledge of nature, knowing what was safe, what was poisonous, what healed, and what harmed. A red berry on one plant could be sweet and delicious, while a similar-looking one on another could cause serious illness. One mistake could be deadly. So, the knowledge they carried in their heads was like a walking, talking survival manual, built from generations of trial and error. With woven baskets, animal skin pouches, and simple digging sticks, foragers searched forests, meadows, and riverbanks. They looked for roots, tubers, nuts, berries, seeds, and even fungi. Some things, like nuts, were packed with calories and could be stored for later. Others, like berries, were enjoyed fresh or mashed and dried into fruit leather for future meals. And it wasn't just about gathering food, it was about passing down knowledge. As they moved through the landscape, elders told stories. Children listened and learned, not in a classroom, but on the trail. Every plant had a name, a purpose, and sometimes even a story. They learned to spot the seasons, read the colors of leaves, and smell the soil. It was education through experience, and the forest was the teacher. Once the group returned to camp, the real magic happened. Food sharing. Everything was laid out, roots, fruits, seeds, and divided fairly. There was no hoarding. Everyone got a share, and everyone knew who had gathered what. This fairness built trust, and that trust made the group stronger. So, while the hunters brought back meat, the gatherers brought back life, day after day, season after season. Now let's look at what communication was like for the cavemen. You see, cavemen didn't have language like we do today. There were no long-winded speeches or clever wordplay. But that doesn't mean they didn't communicate. In fact, they were incredibly expressive. They used gestures, facial expressions, and simple proto-language sounds, grunts, clicks, hums, to share ideas, warnings, and emotions. A single look or hand signal could say, "Danger there, food here, follow me." It was basic but powerful and incredibly effective for survival. And then came the stories. Once the fire was glowing and people had settled in, the cave walls transformed into a stage. Storytelling took center stage, not with words, but with movements, mimicry, and sound. One person might reenact a wild boar chase. Another could tell a tale of the storm that almost swept the group away. There was no script, but there was drama, laughter, suspense, and sometimes even tears. These storytellers weren't just performers. They were memory keepers. The ones who remembered the old trails, the successful hunts, the mistakes that almost cost lives. They passed down lessons wrapped in tales, using rhythm and repetition to help others remember. No one wrote anything down, but nothing was forgotten. Because when stories are passed by firelight, straight from one heart to another, they tend to stick. But cavemen didn't just tell stories. They drew them, carved them, and even wore them. So what did cavemen do when the work was done, the fire was warm, and the night stretched out around them? They created. That's right, these early humans weren't just hunters and gatherers. They were artists, musicians, and symbol makers. They saw the world around them and felt something stir inside, the urge to leave a mark, to express, and to connect. Some of the most breathtaking evidence of this is hidden deep in ancient caves, far from the living spaces. On those walls, they painted animals with powerful limbs, handprints, and swirling abstract shapes. Some paintings were simple outlines, others were detailed, layered, and hauntingly beautiful. They used whatever materials they could find, charcoal from burnt wood, red ochre from crushed rock, and even blown pigments made by spitting paint through hollow bones. A handprint wasn't just painted, it was stenciled, using this blowing technique. That level of intention says something big. This wasn't doodling, it meant something. But what? No one knows for sure. Maybe these paintings were about rituals or hopes for a successful hunt. Maybe they told stories of ancestors or celebrated nature's power. Some researchers even believe certain patterns might have been early forms of a calendar, tracking the seasons, the moon, or animal migrations. Whatever the meaning, one thing's clear. These were not mindless cavemen. They had ideas, beliefs, and a sense of identity. And their creativity didn't stop at cave walls. Cavemen wore beads made of shells, pendants carved from bone, and painted their bodies for ceremonies or status. They may not have had mirrors, but they understood beauty, symbolism, and the power of appearance. So when we talk about cavemen, let's not forget, they didn't just survive the harsh world around them. They also found ways to understand it, celebrate it, and connect with each other through it. Now to the big question. Where do these cavemen lay their heads at night? If you think caveman life was all about brute strength and whoever had the biggest stick calling the shots, think again. In reality, prehistoric groups were built on cooperation, wisdom, and balance. Everyone had a role, and while certain patterns were common, like men doing most of the hunting and women focusing on gathering, it wasn't a strict rule. These roles were flexible. If a woman was skilled with a spear, she hunted. If a man knew plants, he gathered. Survival didn't care about gender, it cared about ability. Leadership didn't come from power or intimidation, it came from experience. The person with the most knowledge, especially about the land, animals, or weather, naturally became the one others looked to. Decisions weren't barked out. They were often made through quiet agreement, with elders playing a crucial role. They were the keepers of memory, the ones who had seen it all and guided with calm, not control. And when conflict happened, it didn't always end in a fight. Sometimes people just separate for a while, or a gift was given to smooth over tension. Most of the time, disagreements were handled with quiet conversations, away from the group. Peace meant safety and everyone knew it. In these small bands of 20 to 50 people, trust was everything. You needed to know that someone would share food, guard the fire, or watch your back during a hunt. Every person mattered. There was no just a kid, just a gatherer, or just an elder. Everyone's role was valuable. And often, it was the daily chores, grinding seeds, repairing shelters, drying meat, where the real social bonding happened. People talked, laughed, passed down stories, and made plans, all while working side by side. This tight-knit way of life made survival possible. And more than that, it made it meaningful. But for many of these early humans, life wasn't just physical. There were signs they believed in something more, something spiritual. Let's step into that mysterious part of their world next. wasn't just about food, fire, and shelter. There was something deeper, something unseen that shaped how they lived, how they died, and how they made sense of it all. Cavemen didn't have organized religions. No temples, no written prayers, but that doesn't mean they lack belief. In fact, the evidence shows they were rich in symbolic thinking, with rituals and practices that suggest a strong connection to the spiritual world. Take burials, for example. When someone died, they weren't just left behind. Bodies were often carefully placed in the earth, sometimes in fetal positions, surrounded by beads, animal bones, or painted with red ochre, a natural pigment believed to represent life, blood, or rebirth. These weren't random acts, they were signs of respect, and maybe even a belief in life after death. Some individuals may have been seen as shamans or spiritual guides, those who interpreted dreams, knew which plants could heal, or led the group through important rituals. These visionaries didn't wear robes, but they likely held a unique role in the group, respected for their intuition and connection to the unknown. Certain places also seem special, especially deep caves, far from daily life. People traveled into the dark with torches to create art, to perform rituals, or maybe even to speak with spirits. These were the temples of the Stone Age, where the flicker of fire met the echoes of mystery. There were rituals for big life moments, births, coming of age, death, the first successful hunt. These moments were marked, not ignored. They reminded people that life wasn't just survival, it had meaning. Animals were more than just food. Many were believed to have spirits, and some may have been seen as protectors or guides. Others, like large predators, were respected and feared, often appearing in cave paintings and carvings as powerful symbols. And then there was the sky. Even without telescopes, early humans watched the stars, the moon, the sun. They noticed patterns. They followed the seasons. These celestial clues may have guided when to move, when to hunt, or when to celebrate. The sky wasn't just decoration. It was a calendar, a compass, maybe even a storyteller. Through it all, early humans found ways to bring meaning to suffering and purpose to preparation. Life was harsh, yes, but it was also full of wonder. And part of that wonder came from how closely they lived with the land itself. So let's explore their deep connection with nature and how they adapted to it, season after season. Even in the stillness of evening, when the fire crackled low and the sky turned black with stars, the day wasn't truly over. Because for cavemen, survival meant always thinking ahead. Tomorrow wasn't promised, but that didn't stop them from preparing for it. First came the tools. After a full day of use, weapons and utensils were checked carefully. Spears were resharpened, stone blades were tested, and broken ones were repurposed into smaller scrapers or cutters. A dull tool tomorrow could mean disaster, so better to fix it while the fire was still warm. Next was food storage. The day's meat was hung near the fire to dry or smoke. Berries were sometimes mashed into paste and pressed flat. Early versions of fruit leather. Fat from animals was stored in hides or shells, preserved for leaner days ahead. Cavemen didn't have fridges, but they had systems, and they worked. Shelters also got attention. Hides were repositioned, logs restacked, and waste cleared to keep the living space clean and safe. A night storm or prowling predator could turn a careless camp into a dangerous one. So little by little, they tidied, adjusted, and made things ready. But it wasn't all physical. There was also mental preparation. People gathered around the fire, pointing to the sky or the ground, discussing tracks they'd seen, wind direction, or the way animals had moved. These signs helped them decide whether to stay, hunt elsewhere, or even migrate to a new spot. And when it came time to move, packing wasn't random. They took only what mattered: sharp tools, food, water vessels, hides, and fire kits made from ember-holding stones or dry moss. Everything was light, portable, and essential. Campsites were checked one last time, entrances were secured, embers were buried or carried, and waste was moved away to avoid attracting unwanted guests. Some believed that dreams during sleep could offer signs or warnings, so they paid attention to them. A strange dream might shift tomorrow's plans. All of this, every sharpened tool, every carefully packed basket was more than routine. It was hope, a quiet belief that tomorrow would come and that when it did, they'd be ready for it. Because to them, preparation wasn't just practical, it was a form of faith. And it's that spirit of resilience that leads us to the final piece of this story. The cavemen didn't just survive in a harsh world, they laid the foundation for everything that came after. From the way they formed close-knit communities to how they adapted to their environment, expressed themselves through art, believed in something greater, and passed on their knowledge, they were resilient, resourceful, and deeply human. And the truth is, many of the things we think define us today, curiosity, cooperation, storytelling, and problem-solving, they all started around those ancient fires, in those early camps, with those first steps into the unknown. So the next time you hear the word caveman, don't picture a clueless brute swinging a club. Picture an innovator, a teacher, a parent, a dreamer, someone who made meaning out of survival, and in doing so, shaped the path for all of us.